In today's episode, we're going to sew up a frighteningly cute table topper for Halloween. This features 3 of the 6 designs from my placemat panel for Riley Blake Designs. I'll also show you how to make this economy block, how to quilt it, bind it, everything you need to know. So let's get started. This table runner is made with 3 images and 2 quilt blocks. This is called an economy block. And even if you have never made a quilt block before, I'm going to show you how to be successful with this one. So this is an economy block. It's basically a square, kind of an offset square, but that's made out of triangles in a big square, also made with triangles. So let's talk about what we need for this. 1 6-inch block for the center. Then you're going to cut 2 6-inch blocks, I'm using black, for these 4 triangles. And then 2 7-inch blocks for your outer triangles. And this is where I recommend you either fussy cut, which means you cut it to fit a specific image from a fabric right in the center, or you use a directional fabric. See how these are directional? I recommend you use a solid or a non-directional print for these pieces. You can use directional, it's a little more complicated. So if you're new to quilting and quilt blocks, just go with basic. We don't have to think as much. So that's what we're going to do here. This we're obviously not going to cut because that's the square in the center. But these, as long as you layer them perfectly, you can cut them at the same time. And we are going to cut them on the diagonal. So just line your ruler up to the points. And I'm using a 12.5-inch Lori Holt Cute Cut ruler for this. I like to have a lot of different size rulers around so that, I don't have this big, huge ruler when I'm cutting smaller things. Just makes it a little bit more manageable. So now we have these 4. And then we're going to do the same with the black. So those are the inner triangles, outer triangles, and the square. Now we're going to line up the first 2 of the inner triangles. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this center square and we are going to fold it in half, and I'm just going to finger press so that I can see a crease, but it's not making one so stiff like you would make with an iron. Then I'm going to take this triangle, which is obviously big. It's much bigger than the square, because we're going to make these triangles oversized and then cut them to size. So this is also really good if you are new to quilting, because if you're a little bit off on your seams or your pressing, we're going to be cutting to size, so it's not going to mess up your block. So now what I'm doing is I am lining up the point with that crease, and that makes sure that I get this triangle centered on this square. And then you want to make sure this edge is lined up perfectly. Then you can decide how you want to put these together. You can either clip or pin. Sometimes I do both. It depends whichever you feel is going to hold your fabrics together better. I've honestly started using pins more on quilt blocks because quilt blocks are where you really, really, really need to be precise so that everything turns out and your corners are perfectly lined up and crisp. Now we're going to turn this over. We're going to grab our second triangle, and I'm going to pull this one back so that I can see that fold. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to line up this edge and I'm going to get that point in that fold. Okay, so that is lined up and we're off to the sewing machine. Now we're going to sew down each side with a 1/4-inch seam, and it is really important that you keep it straight. Here are a few tips for success. Sometimes, and I'm using a 1/4-inch foot, so I'm just going to run it right along the edge. On my machine, I could just press the pedal. It's going to put the foot down, put the needle down, start sewing. But sometimes just that motion moves things ever so slightly. So no matter what kind of machine you have, I recommend you hold your piece of thread so it doesn't get sucked down when it gets knotted. And put your foot down to make sure that you're lined up perfectly at that 1/4-inch mark. Then I'm also going to put my needle down before I press the foot, because I don't want all these feet moving before I know that I'm lined up really well. Then I'm just going to go pretty slowly just to make sure everything stays lined up. Now I'm going to repeat that on the other side. Turn my mat back over so you can see better. So the next thing we're going to do, because these are oversized for what we need for this block, is we're going to turn it this way and we're going to trim the ends of the triangles flush with that square. Then I'm using my Bitty Buddy from Gypsy Quilter. It's just a little trash can that's right on your desk. It's so much better than when I used to throw it at the trash can off my workspace and regularly had pieces of fabric all over the floor because it wouldn't fly well, or because I'm a bad shot, or both. So I do love just keeping this on my workspace, and then when it gets full, I take it over the trash and every piece makes it in. So now we have this step. We're going to do the same thing we did. We're going to fold this in half, making sure that you match the seam on the square so that we're really, really getting that square folded in half. I'm going to finger press, and then we are going to take these triangles and we're going to line the point up with that crease, get the outside edge flush with the edge that we just cut, and pin that together. When you're working on a quilt block, when in doubt, use more pins is my theory, because it's really going to help keep your fabric nice and straight, because any jiggles can really throw off the layout of your block. And if you get a couple jiggles in each seam, you're going to have a less crisp and lined up quilt block than you might want. All right, I'm going to take that back to the sewing machine, do the same thing, and press those seams out. So you'll notice that these black triangles in our finished block seem much smaller than the triangles in the block in progress. And that is for good reason, because these blocks are too big. So this is part of what I talked about, that it's going to be oversized, and we're going to trim it to size so that we get nice, perfect corners and everything like that. So now we need to trim this. So what you're going to do is you're going to turn it on an angle. You're going to find your 1/4 inch mark on the side of your ruler and line that up with that point. When that is lined up, you're going to then make sure that your little lines, whatever kind of lines you have on your ruler, are lined up with these 2 points. And that's going to be what makes sure you have this lined up properly. Because if you just try and do a 1/4 inch based on one point, you could be at a 1/4 inch and have your ruler like this. So to make sure it's straight, you're going to use these 2 points as your guides. And take your time with this, because this is the key to success. So this is not a place to go, oh, heck, I just want it done, and wing it. Take your time. And we're going to do this on all 4 sides. Now it looks a lot more like what we're going for. Now we're going to get these white pieces of fabric sewn on. I'm going to show you a little tip that you can do to make your fabric feel a little stiffer and make sure that it doesn't move on its own when you're sewing it together. So what you're going to do is you're going to take spray starch, or I'm using this Faultless Firm Finish, which is ironing spray, basically the same thing. So just follow the directions. You're going to spray a little bit onto your fabric. We'll just put a piece of Ghosts down here to catch any overspray. So you're going to spray these triangles with that starch, and then you're going to iron them to make the spray dry and give the fabric that body that it needs to hold its shape a little bit better when we add these to the quilt block. So now we're going to fold this in half again, but we're going to fold it on the points. And that gives us our guide for pinning on our outer triangles. So we're lining up this point and this edge. And then we're going to turn, fold that back so we can see the crease, and do the same thing with the opposite side, just like we did with those black triangles. All right, now just like with the black ones, we're going to sew those on, press them out. We sewed, pressed these, and added the last set of triangles, so we're almost done our block. Now we're just going to sew these on with the 1/4 inch seam. Now we're just going to press these out, and then we're going to take it back and trim it down to size, and our block will be done. So just for comparison again, here's our finished block, which is cut to 11.5 inches, and here's the one we're just completing. Has a little bit more than a 1/4 inch over here, so we are going to trim that the same way we trimmed the black ones. But see how nicely those points are lined up right on the edge? Ah, it's going to be so cute. For trimming this side, we don't have to turn the center on a diagonal because we're going to be going off of the black this time. So you're going to line up your 1/4 inch mark right at that black point right here. And then you're going to make sure that your line is hitting this point and this point. And again, take your time on this because this is what makes or breaks where your points go when you sew this totally together. And you can tell this wasn't perfectly straight. So this is why when I can, I really like doing oversized blocks and trimming them so that they don't end up distorting everything in a project. All right, let's check that measurement. Perfection, 11.5 inches. So now we have our 2 economy blocks and our 3 placemat panels. We're going to put the Happy Halloween in the center. And you'll notice the brown around this, how I cut it, isn't perfect, but that's okay. As long as the brown is less than 1/4 inch, it's not going to show on your finished project. So I'm just going to line these 2 up. Oh my gosh, this is going to seem so easy peasy. After doing all those quilt blocks, we're just going to line up this edge and pin that. On this point, I'm going to put this pin way in here so that I can leave that pin together even when I sew, because we want to make sure we get over that spot and right at that intersection of stitches, which you can't really see because it's black on black, so that that point looks really, really good when we get that sewn together. All right, I have all these pieces together. It is 72 inches long, so obviously much bigger than will fit on my camera. To show you that. Now we're going to cut the border pieces for our topper. And because I'm using directional fabric, we have to be careful about which direction we cut it, because I want my ghosts facing up all the way around, not sideways on the sides. You're going to need 3/4 yard of this fabric to create this project, and that includes for those center squares. So we're going to put our small ruler away because obviously it's too small. We're going to get out our big one and we are going to cut 4 pieces, 2.5 inches wide, going this direction, and that will be the top and the bottom of our table runner. So it's going to be 2 pieces to go on each side. I'm just going to cut 4. And make sure when you're using your rotary cutter and your ruler, you want to have your hand flat. My friend warned me about this years ago and I didn't listen, and I kept doing this to feeling like I was pressing down more, and I ended up with a messed up thumb tendon that took 9 months to heal. So make sure you're keeping your hand flat. Kind of put your pinky over here to help your ruler from sliding if you can as you cut, and your thumb will thank you. So I have 4 in that direction. We're going to piece these together just like we would do binding. But first we need to get those strips for the side. For that, we need a 12-inch piece, which is the rest, most of the rest of your 3/4 yards. And you'll have fabric left to do other projects with this as well. I'm going to cut off the ends so we're not working with the selvage. And for this, we just need 2 strips that are 2.5 inches wide. And because this is folded over, I just need to make 1 cut and I'll be good to go. And I cut these to 12 inches, even though this is 11.5, because I like to do it a little bit bigger and then trim it after it's sewn on, just to make sure it's going to be straight at the ends. And I'm going to pin this on both of the short ends of the table runner. So when you do Halloween decor, do you like cute Halloween or scary Halloween? I'm assuming you might like cute Halloween if you're still with me on this project, because this fabric is definitely cute or even maybe rustic Halloween, not spooky. What other kinds of things do you sew for Halloween? Do you sew kids' costumes? Do you make more home decor? Love to know. Drop me a comment and let me know what you love to make for Halloween. Now we're going to sew these 2 ends onto our long strip that we just made with a 1/4 inch seam. Put one of your fabrics face up, straight up if it's directional. When you're putting this together, you always put right sides together and at a 90-degree angle. Now, if you're using directional fabric, never ever sew until you test it. So you can put a pin at an angle where you would sew. So that's going to be the stitch line. And then pull that down and make sure, voila, yay, we did it right. Make sure everything's straight up, because every once in a while you'll put this upside down and you'll have half the things right side up, half the things right side down. Then you're going to be using your seam ripper again. But this worked. So I'm going to connect these 2 together, and then I'm going to do the other set of 2 as well. If you feel like you're going to sew straight, you can eyeball going from here to here, or you can mark it to be safe, which I definitely recommend, especially if you're a newer sewer. See, here I am with even more sizes. Cute cut rulers. I just got a whole set of the rectangles. I use them all. Now I'm just going to line that up, and then I'm going to take a chalk pen from Clover I'm just going to draw a line on there. So now I have a guideline to follow when I sew that diagonal. I'm just going to check that, make sure it's good. Yep, still good. So now you can either take it back to your mat and use your rotary cutter to cut 1/4 inch from the seam, or you can just use scissors. Then I'm going to press that seam open, and I'm going to have the band that we'll use on the top and the bottom of the table runner. So we put the ends on and I press those seams. So now I'm just going to cut the edges off so that they are even with the side of the placemat. Now our ends are lined up. Now comes the task of pinning the strips across the top and the bottom. Now make sure the selvage is off of the end so that you don't end up having, Riley Blake as part of your table runner. Put everything face up to make sure you have the directionality proper. So everything is facing up, so that is good to go. Now you can either fold down and pin, or I prefer to have my table runner side so I know that I'm hitting that corner properly on top of this little sandwich. So I'm going to do it like this. But I'm also still making sure that I'm having the same edges together. So I can just do this to double check. Okay, directions are good. And I like to make sure I put a pin at every seam line to make sure that all stays straight. So those 2 strips together gave us almost exactly what we needed. It has about 3.5 inches on this side. And what did we leave on this side? Not much, just a little bit over the selvage. So now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine. I'm going to sew that side on with a 1/4 inch seam, and then I'm going to press it out and we're going to pin on the bottom. Now that we have the borders sewn on and trimmed so they're nice and square on each end, it is time to sandwich this together with the back and the batting so that we can quilt this before we add the seam binding. So to do that, you need 1 yard of whatever fabric you're going to use for your backing and cut it into 2 18-inch pieces, which I already did because it's pretty simple. So cut it into 2 18-inch pieces and sew that together, press your seams open. So I'm going to use the purple version of the October Ghosts on the back. And we're going to put this on our workspace, wrong side up. Because we're going to be quilting this together, we're not doing any right sides together or else we're going to have wrong sides out. So wrong side up. Then we're going to take our strip of batting, which is about 18 inches wide and longer than 82 inches. You always want your backing and your batting. It's not perfectly straight, but we trim it later. You always want your backing and your batting to be longer and wider by at least like 1 inch than the top of your quilt or table runner or whatever you're going to be quilting. So this is the center. So I'm going to lay that. And before I get it really laid out well, I'm going to just double check that all the ghosts are pointing in the same direction. So you'll see the backing is a bit bigger and the batting's even bigger than the backing, but that's fine. You just want everything a little bit bigger than this. Now I'm going to grab quilting safety pins. And what makes it a quilting safety pin, you ask? The size. It's big. So this is a traditional safety pin, and this is a quilting safety pin. And you want it big because you want to be able to go through all the layers and really hold a bit together. So that's going through all the 2 fabrics and the batting. And this is what we're going to be using just to hold this sandwich together, basically, while we go around and quilt it. There's not a ton of rhyme or reason, just you want to make sure it's pretty secure because this is a really long piece. So it's going to be moving around a bit as you take it to the sewing machine and as you're working on the quilting. So you want to make sure it all stays lined up. Also, when you're putting these pins in, make sure you have your material over a rotary mat and not on top of wood. Sometimes you're poking down and you don't want to be scratching your workstation or your dining room table or wherever you happen to be working. So just be aware of what is under the section that you're using when you're inserting these pins. Now, because this is pretty long off the end, I am going to cut that off. just so that there's a little bit less that I have to manage, and that's going to get a lot of lint on you when you sew. So it's just better not to have a ton of batting hanging off the end. Before we head to the sewing machine, let's talk about thread. I often just sew with black or white when I'm piecing things together, but when you get to the quilting stage of a project, you might want to choose a color. Whatever you use for your bobbin thread is what is going to show on the back of your project. So I grabbed all the purples that I have, and I feel like Goldilocks. None are quite right. That's a little dark. These are too lilac. Gosh, that's so dark it almost looks black. That one's no. I could do white because there's a lot of ghosts, or I could do this. I guess I could do black, but I'm not in love with black. It's a little too dark. I'd rather do this. It'll blend a little bit better. What to do? What would you do? Would you do white or would you do purple? Then on the top, I can also decide, do I want to do a matching, do I want to use white? Do I want to use black? Do I want to use orange? I could also do a combination of colors. Maybe I'll do black here, do orange here, do some white. We shall see what we decide when we are at the sewing machine. Did you know that you can get pre-wound bobbin thread, and it always has way more thread on it that lasts a lot longer than if I do it myself. So I always buy packs of black or white, and there will be a link below this video for you to find them. So I'm going to put a new white one in, because when you're getting into quilting, especially if you're going to be doing some free motion quilting, which I am, you use a bit of thread. And I have changed my needle. I actually have a stitch in the ditch needle on, which I don't need for the basting step, but I can use it because it's just going to save me one less time to change that needle. If you have any walking feet are really good for quilting, because basically a walking foot, you have the feet on the bottom of your sewing machine that always move. Every sewing machine has that. But if you have a machine where you can get a walking foot, it also has little feet that move the top. So you have them working in unison, moving the top and bottom, so you get less pinching. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a straight stitch, and you're going to set it for as long as you possibly can on your sewing machine. That's a 5 stitch on mine. And we're going to stitch really, really close to the edge. We're just basting this together so that it doesn't shift when we're doing the more intricate quilting. And so we want it about 1/8 of an inch from the edge, because we don't want this basting to show when we add the binding later. If you're newer to quilting and you're not familiar with the term stitch in the ditch, let's talk about what that means. It basically means to stitch right in where that seam is, so where the two fabrics meet, so that you're kind of hiding your quilting stitches and they're not really showing. I am using a stitch in the ditch foot on my Economy machine. So basically you can see it has this little metal part that comes down, and you use that as a guide. So as I'm sewing, I'm going to keep that right in that ditch, and then my needle should follow. So let's stitch in the ditch all the way around the border, and then I'm going to do some stitch in the ditch sewing on the economy blocks as well. Now that we're going to be moving the quilt around more, it is time to break out quilting gloves. And they basically have little dots of silicone that helps you grip the fabric and move it more. It's easier on your hands because you don't have to hold as tightly to get things moving. And it also makes your quilting go better. These, I love these. They're purple from Gypsy Quilter. There's lots of other brands as well. And then one of my friends actually got gardening gloves and then cut the tip off of it so that she was still able to use her phone without having to take her glove off, because that is one issue you can have. So I'm going to wear these when I do the rest of this quilting. And as you quilt by machine, you just want to make sure you're keeping things as flat and smooth as possible as you're moving it through your sewing machine so that your fabrics don't bunch up and cause buckles. Now that I stitched in the ditch all the way around the border, I'm going to be doing it on the economy block. Now, one thing that's tricky about machine quilting is what to do with all the quilt as you're moving it around under the machine. The main thing is you need to keep it rolled up or together so that the part you're working on stays flat, so you don't have any bunching on the back. You can buy little clips that will help with that, but I usually manage to get it work just by rolling it. So let's stitch in the ditch around the block. Now, Now, because I've already done this section, I don't want to go over it again for fear it's going to make it look bad. And you'll definitely see more of those stitches if I were to double stitch on the back. So I'm just going to be doing the short sections that need to be done and just keep moving my machine. I'll give you more of a bird's eye view of how to deal with the fabric that's around the area that you're stitching. See how we got a couple stitches on the black. I don't like them. So I didn't knot this. I just cut the thread, and I'm just going to use my seam ripper and pull them out to here, because that's where I went awry. Okay, so I got them out of the top. Then I am going to turn this over and find that thread, and I'm going to trim that before I start stitching again so that I don't end up with a bulky little thread down there. And then I'm going to start a little bit back so that I'm going over the stitches that I already did to make sure that they're not going to fall out. And there we go. We stitched down this side, we stitched around the black, and then I'm going to do the same on the other economy block. Now I took off my stitch in the ditch foot and we're back to a regular foot, but still a walking foot. I'm using the edge of this metal, like where the metal meets the plastic, as my guide, and I'm going to go around this square. So now I just need to do the other one. I now have my free motion foot on my machine, and I'm going to do just some fun stitching around the pumpkins, the banners up here. You definitely need your gloves if you're going to be doing free motion, because you need to have pretty good grip on your fabric to get it to move and stay flat. So you can really have a lot of fun with this and do as much detail or as little as you want. See how I added little lines to the hat. So for that one, I just chose to do a simple stitch down the center. If you want to be more detailed, you could go around all of the edges for a little bit different look. So I had fun with that. Tried not to be too much of a perfectionist. Just threw those stitch lines in there, accentuated their mouths, their cute little faces, went up along the banner line up here. On this one, I did a little bit more detail. I stitched along each of the letters and then also did some accent on the little pumpkin. And then back on the ghosts. Now that I have this all quilted together, looking cute, it is time to trim the edges. So you're just going to take your rotary cutter and your ruler, and you're going to get this all squared off. And I like to square based on the inside. So if you need to cut a little bit of that border, that's okay. You're going to do all four sides. Now the edges are all cut and trimmed, and we are ready to do the binding. And I have made 6 strips width of fabric in black, put them together just like we stitched together these top borders, and then pressed the entire strip in half. So now let's head back to the sewing machine and get this binding on. We are almost done. We're back at the machine. I have my 1/4 inch walking foot back on, and we are going to attach the binding. So I always like to start the binding on the bottom of a project instead of the top. Then I'm going to do the raw edges of the binding to the raw edges of the table topper. And then I'm going to leave about 10 to 12 inches empty so that we have that space to match our binding once we go all the way around our table topper. Now let me show you the secret to a well-mitered corner. As you get to the end, you're going to stop when your needle is a 1/4 inch from this end. So I'm going to kind of be looking in this way to watch and make sure I stop my needle 1/4 inch from that edge. Then I'm going to leave the needle in, raise the foot, turn this 45 degrees, and I'm just going to sew straight off of that corner. Oh, it's a lot of material. Okay, I'm gonna grab my project. I'm gonna turn it sideways and I'm gonna make sure this part is laying flat. Now I'm going to fold the binding up. So we have a nice corner. This edge is at a 90-degree angle to this, parallel to this edge. And then we're just gonna fold it down over top of itself so that it's nice and squared, see? And then we're just gonna start again and do this next edge. And you're gonna do that on all 4 corners. Now we've gone all the way around and we have left some space, lots and lots of space, open on the bottom. So let me show you how to get your binding to match perfectly every time. I'm going to go about 6 inches and I'm going to cut across. Every time I cut binding, this makes me nervous, but I promise you it works. So you need to cut a piece that when you lay it across your binding is going to be wider. And I'm going to open that up. So we're going to lay that down flat, and then we are going to put this piece on top, lining up this raw edge with that raw edge. Now we're going to place the other side lined up along the edges, just like you would have sewn it, and lay it down flat over top of this piece. And now what we're going to do is we're going to trim this top one to this bottom edge. So I'm going to lift these two and I'm going to trim that. So now you'll see these two are overlapping the exact distance of the width of your binding. And now I'm going to fold the table topper and I'm just going to clip it. And that's just going to make it easier for us to get these 2 pieces together without straining from the distance. Now you're going to take your bottom one and you're going to open it up and place it down. See how it's folded this way? That fold is going to be up. So if you were to let it fold, it's going to pop up like a tent. Then you're going to take the other one and you're going to do it the opposite way. You're going to open it up so that the wrong side, the inside folded, is open. And then you're going to place these together and you're going to line that bottom edge up with the side of the bottom one and the side of this with the cut edge of this. Then we're going to twist. And I'm going to grab my ruler. This is exactly what we did when we made the pieces that went across the top and the bottom, and we had to piece together our fabric. I'm going to get my ruler and my chalk line. And if you want to, you can pin it if it keeps twisting. Sometimes it twists like that for me, sometimes it doesn't. And then we're just going to sew straight down that line. Before you cut that off, you want to double check and make sure you got it right. You want to make sure that when it folds, it's not twisted, it's nice and flat. The distance is perfect. Yes, okay, we did a good job. So now I'm going to open that back up. I'm going to cut that 1/4 inch from the stitch line. Then I'm going to take it to my ironing board. I'm going to press that seam open and then press that down and then just finish that stitch to have the binding stitched all the way around this table topper. Now we have all the binding sewn on, so now we just need to press it, and then I'm going to be machine stitching mine on, which you can do, or if you want to be more traditional, you can hand stitch. So we're going to keep it face up, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to press the binding away from the table topper. And when you do it up in the corner, don't press the actual corner, just kind of press about 1 inch towards it. Press about 1 inch away from that. And we will be getting the corner situated and mitered beautifully when we turn this back over. Once you've gone all the way around, you're going to flip it over and then fold the corners up. We're going to make both of the long ends have this perfect triangle before we iron the short end over. So you want to get that nice and creased. I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. Make sure everything's flat. I'm going to get a nice triangle there. And now we're going to make sure that triangle is folded. We're going to fold that down and that should match beautifully. So now we're just going to press that as well. Do that all the way around. Okay, so that's all ironed. Now there's a few ways to to prepare to finish this. If you want to be a real traditionalist and you don't want any stitching showing on the front, and then you would hand stitch all the way around. That's too much work for me for a project like this, too hard on my wrist. So I am a fan of machine stitching. You can pin or clip this and then sew along. But what I have found when I do that is sometimes it gathers and it doesn't stay exactly where it needs to be. Two ways to fix that. One would be to use a product like Easy Steam. Use a product like this, the Easy Steam. It's basically a tape. It's sticky on both sides. You put that under there, press over it, and that's going to stick. That would work great. I love this stuff for smaller projects. It gets a little expensive to me to do for something like this. The next option, Elmer's School Glue. Very economical, really easy to use. So there are two ways to use your glue. If you're ready to take a break, then you're going to run a little bit of glue and you're going to clip it and you're going to say, oh my gosh, I can't do anything else because my glue needs to dry. Then you're going to come back a little bit later, take your clips off, and the glue is going to be dry. The fabrics are going to be nice and adhered, and you're going to be good to go to sew. But if you're in a hurry and you just want to be done and you don't want to wait for glue to dry, there is another option. So I'm just going to run a thin bead underneath where that binding is going to overlap. And I'm going to turn and I'm going to press it down, and I do it in sections. Turn the steam off on my iron so I'm not adding any moisture. And then I'm just going to quickly press, and the heat is going to dry the glue, and that's going to stay stuck very nicely. So we are going to do that all the way around. Put a few clips every so often, even though I have glued this and dried the glue with the iron, just to make sure it doesn't slip when I am moving it around, because I'm going to be sewing with this on top. So this will be on the bottom. And then I also always clip on the corners. Oh, I forgot to put my little tag in there when I was pressing this. This happens a lot. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my tag. I usually put it on the bottom towards one end. I'm going to pull this up, releasing that glue. And then I'm just going to press that down, and then I'll just add another clip so I know where that is. Now we're going to be turning our project over, and I'm using my 1/4 inch foot again, and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch from the binding. So I'm just going to sew a little bit, and then I'm just going to double check and make sure that we're catching all of the back binding fabric before going all the way around the quilt. Okay, so I've sewn a few inches. Now I'm just going to take a peek and make sure it is catching, and it is. So it's catching or the back of the binding fabric. So now I'm going to go all the way around the table topper. That's it. We are done.